Cool. So we'll start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is the fact that I have not posted in a while. It's actually been a couple of weeks. And I do apologize for that. But that's because one viewer posed a question that struck me and made me go into this deep format of thinking and to essentially come up with what I've come up with and what this channel is going to be about. The individual asked me, well, you've got all this knowledge, you're speaking the truth, but where do you want to go with this? Where do you want to take this? And that's something that I'd not actually asked myself at the time. I just thought, oh, I've learned all of these things throughout life and all the lessons the hard lessons that I've learned. Let me share it in the hopes that it impacts people. But I've come to the realization that if you don't have a goal and you just tend to spread random knowledge, it may fall on deaf ears because you need to give people a reason to listen and therefore an outcome for them to achieve, which is why I had to go back and re-strategize, as I call it, and that's what's taken me a couple of weeks. Right. Nonetheless, let's get into what this channel is going to be about. I believe that in today's society, a lot of people are very dormant. Whether you be partially dormant or fully dormant, it's due to the fact that we have a gift, right? And this gift has been taken away from us. And let me not even say taken away from us. Let's just say we've handed this gift over freely because for some people, it's too much of a burden to bear. Now, what is that gift? That gift is the gift of free will and imagination. So being able to design your life and the reality that you want for yourself. Because when you think about it, we're the only entity on this planet, well, the universe to the best of our knowledge, that's able to conceptualize something, go forth and create it, right? And hopefully good things, but you can do the same with bad things because the universe doesn't judge, right? It just gives. So that being said, on our previous video, we touched on the fact that we live in this world where your reality is as you create it or how you live it. So you have to understand this. You're either living in creation or you're living in reaction. The words are quite, I don't know what the word is. Is it synonym, antonym? Anyway, I didn't do to English guys, but essentially, is it an anagram? Basically, if you take the word creation and reaction, they're the same letters, just in whichever you rearrange it. But some people are living in creation and some people are living in reaction. But the truth is we live within a system, which I will break down in a second, right? So we've talked about the source, God, call it whatever you want to call it. But essentially, the power that runs through the universe. I've talked about this principle of energy not being able to, you can't create energy, you can't destroy energy, it just transforms from one form to the other. And we'll go on to talk about that too. But that being said, as I said, the reason for this channel is because most people are living a reality that wasn't actually, that they didn't create for themselves. It was created and assigned to them. And they thought, oh, I'm just going to live this life that I think I've designed. But the price that you pay for that is a lack of meaning and purpose. Because if you don't have meaning and purpose in your life, it becomes a reality that's subject to a lot of pain and suffering. And you can only just take one look at the world and realize that there's a lot of pain and suffering in the world. But there's also a lot of joy in the world. But the question is, the people who are suffering, did they create their own suffering? Think of it as a TV, right? And you have the choice to watch whatever channel you choose to. If you're watching a channel which you do not like, all you have to do is change it. Oh, but William, it's not that simple. How do you change a reality or the experience of reality that you're having if you feel like you have no control? Well, let's first of all break down what control is and who has it and why it's not in your power and what you can do about it. So as I previously mentioned, we live within a system. Call it a system, call it the matrix, whatever you want to call it. People often feel like it's something which is bad. It's something which you need to break out of, as they say, escape the matrix and whatnot. But as I said, the universe is just. It doesn't judge, oh, this person's a good person, this person's a bad person, this person deserves this and that. The principle of karma. And I do apologize if you believe in karma, but the form of karma in which people tend to believe in is that good people will get good things and bad people will get bad things. It only takes for you to take one big look at the universe and realize the good people are the ones suffering and the bad people tend to be the ones who are having a good time. That's to tell you that karma does not exist in the way that you think it does. Right, so that being said, I said I was going to break down the system. First of all, you need to understand what the aim of the system is, or what the aim that the elites have decided is going to be. Produce, consume, and repeat. That's literally the aim of the system once you understand what the system actually is. So now we're going to look at components of the people who make up the system, the top being the elites, the puppet shadow masters, as they call them. Don't worry, I'm not some crazy conspiracy theorist. I'll actually tell you who these people are, not by name because we don't know, that's classified information, but they're what I call strategic architects. The elites are people who form the central banks, private investors, and supernatural councils. Well, what is a supernatural council? Essentially, in the name, supranational means it's above the nations, and they call shots and make decisions that affect the wider population. And there's a stepwise approach to that, because below them you have the government. Now these are the gatekeepers, the people that control compliance. So your president, your monarchs, but monarchs, let's not get into that. That's a conversation for another day. But essentially, these are the people that make sure that these strategic architectural decisions are enforced down below, right? And below them, you have what I call market titans. These are your economic drivers. So you think of people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. So people with a high amount of influence and financial means. So they're basically able to influence the decision of the general public. So if you think about it, Elon Musk, he dictates the economy in terms of he holds a majority shareholder in a company that basically produces electric cars. Tesla is one of the leading manufacturers of electric cars. So these two people, they have their own agendas. These people are basically responsible for the control and compliance of the decisions that are made. And these people essentially need to comply with these people, whilst these people need these people to make or create things that do not disrupt the ecosystem from down below. So this entire ecosystem and below that you have the general public, which is your average individual, right? The basis of society. So these people are the reason why this system was created, in order to serve these people so they have an organized life. And when you think about it, it's a lot easier to just turn up for a trip, right? Let's say you want to plan a holiday in the Alps because you love skiing, right? And which would you rather do? Would you rather look at the flights, make sure you're complying with the legislations and what you need to pack, and if there's a detour, you need to be aware of that, and then once you get there, you need to be finding out hotel and things you're going to be staying at. So basically a lot of responsibility, right? But if you have that responsibility, it means you can control certain elements of it to create a trip that you desire. However, not everybody wants to do that. Some people just want to turn up for the trip. Hence why you have these groups that create trips where you just make one payment and you just rock up with your bag and then you've arrived at your destination. And that is why the system was created, so that the individuals here do not need to think about all of these big strategic decisions that are being made up there. The issue with system, which I'm going to come into, is that systems are usually created to serve the general population. Now, what happens when the system starts to become broken or corrupt is that the system which was created to serve the individuals then flips, and the individuals now exist to serve the system. So it's like the whole purpose of it has flipped. And as I said, we'll go on to look at how that pans out. And that was basically a long-winded way to tell you that decision power basically rarely flows downwards. Although these are the people that the system was created to serve, these people rarely or seldom have a say as to how this entire system runs. And I know you might be like, oh yeah, but William, we put the people in power who we think that are going to make the best strategic decisions for us. And it's like, okay. I'm not going to refute that or argue with you on that point, but I'm just going to say, when you look at politicians, right, what do you think of? You think of people who you can rarely trust, people who don't stick to their word, and people who say, oh yeah, we're going to do this. And then when they get into the position of power, coming from one of these places, they get here, they don't do the things that they said they were going to do. It's almost like they shapeshift and they're like, oh, like, yeah, who's that guy? I never said that. And then you show them like, hey, wasn't it on this date? You promised us you were going to do this. Like, yeah, that things have kind of changed now. It's because the individuals who are put here, they have the illusion of decision making, but the decision doesn't actually come from them. It comes from these big players up here who actually control how things function, not by manipulation, but by decree, by saying, here's what we want, here's how we think it's going to benefit the general population. Can you enact it for us? And as I said, these two people have to keep a close relationship, because the decisions that these people make fall in their responsibilities, right? And that's why you see people like Elon Musk hanging around people like Donald Trump, and sometimes they'll agree and sometimes they'll disagree, because essentially the ego is very selfish, right? As a human being, everyone, we are primed with an ego that is very selfish. And that's why when, let's say, there's a major calamity that happens, let's say this building exploded all of a sudden, everyone's instinct is run, every man for themselves, unless like counteractive emotions, other systems kick in, like say for example a mother who wants to run but they're like, oh my god, I have a child who's my duty to protect. They're going to feel the instinct to run back and grab that child. But essentially every man for themselves is how the human ego works, and systems are created to make sure that people stay in line, and so people's ego don't take over. But even at the higher levels, ego still takes over. And that's why you see Donald Trump is friends with Elon Musk today, and then tomorrow they're the worst of enemies, because it's all a strategic ploy. And it goes back to the saying of keep your friends close but keep your enemies closer, and all that malarkey. Do with that what you like. Now, the problem that the system has created, as we've seen, is that the system was created to serve the individuals down below. But now the individuals down below have a problem, because the system has been created in such a way that it's influenced people's meaning and purpose negatively, in such a way that there is a very low amount of that, or lack thereof, shall we say. And what does that look like? So market titans push economic drivers by creating things that are useful to the general public. But in order to create these things, they need the general public to create these very things, and simultaneously the general public is the one who uses them. So think about it this way, right? Elon Musk creates cars. Essentially, think of someone, big manufacturer, creates something that makes your life easier. Amazon creates essentially you being able to shop online and have things at your disposal. But for that, it needs warehouse. It needs people who works in these warehouses. It needs customer relations management. So these individuals work within the system, and they're the very users of the system. So it creates convenience, but simultaneously you have to think of what it takes to create that convenience. I'm sure you saw the scandal of how people were complaining, oh my god, the conditions in which Amazon warehouse workers working is completely atrocious. I'm just basically showing you how the system that was created to help the individuals makes the very individuals suffer. Now, this person here makes a lot of money and has to comply with a lot of legislations that these people set, who is governed by these people above. But why the system is corrupt and how it negatively impacts the individuals, even though it was created to help them, is because people become egocentric. This person wants to make as much profit as possible. This person wants to stay in power whilst making as much profit as possible. The investors and the central banks have their own interests at heart, because they want to create generational wealth for themselves and their family. So who's left to pay? The person here at the bottom. Because think about it. Produce, consume, repeat. Down here at the bottom, when you go to college, like they said, university for those of us in the UK, and then you graduate, you get a job, you're now like, okay, cool, I'm gonna go work for a law firm, a banking company, the healthcare system, whatever system it is, right? Each individual system still falls within down this bracket. So you get a job, you go, and then you start to operate within this system. And for those who are very switched on, you quickly realize that, hey, like the impact that this system is supposed to have is not actually the impact that it's having. And then if you want to make something, like say, I don't know, I'm trying to not step on anybody's toes here, but let's just say the Amazon warehouse scandal, for example, you went to go work at Amazon and you hold an executive position, and essentially you don't like the conditions in which the workers are working. If you try to raise that, the people here are very aware, the market titans, they're very aware. They know how their shipping process is. They know the conditions in which their workers work. But if you try to raise that, because that is what sustains their profit, you now become the bad person. It's like, how dare you come into this system which we've employed you, and you want to now complain about the people that are having a harsher time than you are. So you realize like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I guess it's just the system. If you can't beat them, you join them. Right? So again, back to why people are suffering. People have been put into this position where the life is designed for them, where you have limited options, right? People say dream big and all of that, but essentially dream big in those days was essentially go to uni, start working a high paying job, start a family, so you can basically work to survive. it wasn't so bad back then when you were able to make a median salary that was enough to raise a family and pay for the average home. But now look at the cost of living crisis, inflation, and everything that's happening globally, which is still a systemic issue. You now realize like, hey, hold on a minute. I've been sold a shorthand here. I've got a decent paying job. I can barely afford a house. I can barely make a family. The relationship pool is looking a bit mad. What is this life that has been given to me that I didn't sign up for, but I thought, you know, I kind of did, but now I'm realizing it wasn't really up to me. And then when you get here, there's two things that happen. Well, the number one thing that has happened is something I've termed capitalist-induced insanity, because the system I've just broken down is a capitalist system where the people with the highest means and the highest influence, by means I mean monetary value, and by influence I mean what level of society they sit in, those very few people dictate and call the shots for what happens to the people down here. As I said, when the system produces something, these are the people who consume it, then generating data on how that consumption happens, which then gives the people more information, well, the people at the higher echelons of society, more information in order to make the system better and essentially keep the user consuming the system whilst producing things and updates that tighten the system and makes the user dependent on consumption of the system, and then just repeat the whole process. So essentially, once you've understood that, you realize that what's actually happening is decision-making power is rarely flowing downwards, but information is flowing upwards. So these people are taking all the information, so your data through Facebook, Instagram, essentially, they know everything there is to know about you to make and produce things that you need based on the conditions that they've created, which you likely do not want. And now you're hooked and stuck in this cycle, right? Which you cannot break out of. And the reason I've called it capitalist-induced insanity is because there is a very major shift in terms of people lacking meaning. If you look at suicide rates, they've gone up. They're historically at their highest. And the reason is, as I said, we live in a confined universe where you're basically creating a reality or reacting to a reality that you haven't created. And it's like putting on a VR headset, right? Think about it for a second. If you put on a VR headset and all you saw was shock and horror and pain, you'll be like, oh my God, take this off, right? Taking this off equals unaliving yourself. So we're not going to go into the intricacies of how that happens. We could in another video, but we're just keeping things very surface level here, as this is the first video. Now, as I've said, capitalist-induced insanity is living in a capitalist system that was created and you're not getting the joys of it. You're only getting the pain and the suffering. And you think to yourself, what? Nah, something's got to change. But majority of people don't change anything because they think to themselves, oh, I'm just one individual and I'm fighting against an entire system, which is correct. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, which is where people are at today's world. They hate their job, come back home. Well, I've got to pay the bills, so I've got to go back to the 9 to 5. And then so that's the loop that people are stuck in. And as I said, capitalist-induced insanity. And then two things happen from here, right? It branches off. Some people go seeking for meaning. They want spirituality. They want to assign a meaning to their suffering because they're like, surely this is not all for nothing. That is delusion in and of itself. And then down here, some people just, well, as I said, I'm just one individual against a system. What can I do? So they go for acceptance and escapism. And that's why you see people like they'll literally work their butt off just to get to the weekend to have some form of relief, to then go work their butt off to get to the weekend or they'll book a holiday. But it's the same cycle. It's the same thing from a higher vantage point. So whether it's the weekend for relief, whether it's a holiday working up for a couple of months to get to a holiday so you can have a relief so you can come back to the same thing and book another holiday next year. It's a form of acceptance and feeling like you're powerless and you cannot change that situation. And then going back to these people here who say, oh, well, we're seeking for meaning because there has to be a meaning for our suffering. And they delude themselves into saying like, oh, this suffering is so that we can suffer in this life. So in the afterlife, we may have peace and joy. But it's like, I don't like getting into like political or philosophical or religious exchanges, even though I love those things in themselves, but exchanging, like arguing points, is people get too emotional. Because to quote Christ himself, he said, I came so people could have life and have it to the fullest, which means to enjoy life here and then in the afterlife, which is not how people think the afterlife actually is, but that's a whole other subject. But essentially he said he came so that people could wake up and realize the power that they hold within this confine and be able to create the reality that they want to experience, and then also still be able to have peace in the afterlife, which again, as I said, is not what most people think it is, right? So people that are here have this whole, well, I'm gonna suffer now so my spirit can be at peace later. And the truth is, you were not meant to suffer. The suffering here that you're trying to assign a meaning to, if you look back at my previous video where I explained that we are a form of energy, consciousness, fragmented into different particles that are basically creating the confines of this reality that we're experiencing. Once you understand that, you understand we are literally the orchestrator of our own demise. So how can the very person that's making themselves suffer say, I'm going to put meaning to this suffering? That's like taking this ruler, hitting myself on the head and going, this really hurts, but the reason this is happening to me is so that like I can experience relief later. It doesn't make sense, right? So once you understand that and you realize that we're literally just the same energy fragmented into different persons who are causing our own suffering, you start to think in that search for meaning, how can I make this better? And that's why Jordan Peterson said the antidote to suffering is meaning. Because if you can associate meaning to your suffering, and I don't mean delulu meaning by saying like, oh yeah, I'm going to suffer now and enjoy later when I'm no longer alive. You start to look for ways to positively impact other people so they may have a better experience of this reality they're experiencing here because of my inputs. And then all of a sudden you start to find, it's like the saying goes, he who has a why can bear almost any how. And the person who made that statement understood fundamentally that when you have a reason for something, especially something positive, and you go out there and input it into the world, what you get back is meaning to your existence. And then that is what actually justifies the suffering. And all of a sudden you realize the suffering wasn't actually that bad. The reason you're feeling lost in life is because these people are making decisions that are negatively impacting you, and you're participating in the consumption and the repeat, and then they just produce more of the suffering. You're like, well, why is this happening to me? And another point, I'm going to touch on the fact that these people who seek meaning just outwardly without understanding, first of all, how the system operates and who they actually are basically lost. And then they theorize meanings that do not make sense. Like recently, there was a TikTok trend about, oh, the world is going to end, and so many people believe in it. And when you think about it, the question is, why do so many people subscribe and believe to the fact that the world is going to end so bad? Because if you believe in something that you have no proof for, one could argue that it's because you want it so bad to happen. Like, for example, if I said to you, this might seem a bit dark, but in 5 days' time, you're going to die. You're going to be like, hell, what? I don't want that. I don't want that. Your subconscious intellect basically rejects that narrative because you do not want that to happen. But if I said to you tomorrow, in 5 days' time, you're going to win £1 million, you don't care how. You're just like, yes, praise the Lord. Amen. I'm actually going to pray for that. I hope that's going to happen to me. So when so many people are able to accept the fact that, oh yeah, the world is going to end in a couple of days' time, and they subscribe to it and they're counting down for the world to end, that's to show you how much turmoil, how much suffering people are actually in, where subconsciously they all want it to end. But the truth and the fact of the matter is, the world is not actually going to end the way that you think it's going to, because as I said, delulu, suffering and seeking for meaning, the world has actually ended multiple times over. And I've put a few timelines here so you can see what's happening, because in the Axial Age, you had the end of the world, which was a high time of suffering for people. And that is where people like Confucius, Buddha and Stoicism actually came in, which lifted people's spirits. And they were like, oh, okay, cool. There's finally a meaning to life. Like, started looking introspectively as opposed to outwardly, because back then there was a firm belief and there was an outer God that was basically controlling the universe and causing suffering to people within the universe. And these people brought about a different form of thinking that said, actually, the temple of, which is again, back to biblical principles, the temple of God is within your heart and God's kingdom is within you. And these people basically extrapolated that into different formats, basically, like I said, Stoicism, Buddhism, and ancient Greek philosophy. The reason I say this is for you to understand one thing. As I said previously, the world is not going to end in the way that you think it's going to end. And that's because the world is constantly ending and restarting and ending and restarting. It's a human experience for us to be able to learn as a species, if you want to call it, because if you look at it from a biological and psychological and existential standpoint, we are the human being. If you look at it from a biblical and spiritual standpoint, we're not actually the human being itself, we are the thing within the human being that's having the human experience. Now, that being said, let's explain what the cycle of the world actually ending and restarting is, because you see, in physics, the physicists will call it entropy and renewal of energy, because as I said, energy can't be created or destroyed, it's just renewed from one form to the other. The biologists will call it death and regeneration, and the spiritualists will call it the apocalypse and the end of the world. But essentially, it's like a cardiac cycle, where a cardiac cycle starts, it has an end, but it's not a true end, it's just the beginning of something new, as we see here. So this is an example of a cardiac cycle. This will be one heartbeat. So within this heartbeat, you have repolarization and depolarization, and that creates an action potential. That's a long way to tell you that essentially people are thinking, oh yeah, this is one heartbeat and it's going to end. But the truth is that heartbeat ends for a new one to start, for a new one to start, for a new one to start. So it's a constant cycle. It's just basically energy not being able to be created nor destroyed, but it has to take multiple forms. And that form is basically to remind us of who we are. There's a rebirth. If you look at statistics today, it will tell you that people are flocking to churches, people are flocking to spirituality, people are looking for a meaning to life. And that's because an existential crisis has been created by the very system which we live within, that was created to serve us, but we are now existing to serve capitalism, which basically creates confusion in our brains, and our nervous system is like, oh my God, what's going on? Why am I so fried? The answer to that is very simple. Your nervous system was created to be under duress for a small period of time and not for a long period of time. So, for example, the Axial Age, people remembered God, and then the fall of Rome, 476 CE, everyone's like, oh my God, they're suffering. Like, so many people had wealth. There was a lot of slavery going on. Empires were falling. And essentially people are like, oh, doom, calamity, the world's going to end. And then during the scientific revolution, they remember God again. And then during the industrial revolution, they forget God. And then during the wars, they're like, oh my God, everything is ending. Like, the world's going to end. They go back to God. And then here, look at what's happening. The digital revolution, when it started, everyone forgets God, because now there's a new thing. There's the internet. Everyone's like, oh my God, like businesses, everything's flowing. The Jeff Bezos has come out, the Elon Musk come out. And then when it goes belly up, we're in the AI revolution, and guess what happens? People are now remembering God again. So are you seeing the cycle of what's happening here? So it's like the world would have ended, the world didn't end, the world is going to end, the world didn't end, the world is, it's the same fugazi. Back to what I was saying about people seeking for meaning is because they are feeling lost in a system that has created their existential crisis. And how do you break out of that? Because seeking meaning is one thing, but it's seeking for meaning in the right place and having the right understanding. But you need to have a concept and an understanding of who you are first, know what the source is that powers the universe, and then have an understanding of what control you have within this space in order to create your desired reality, and then being able to say, okay, cool, this is the system that's stacked against me. How do I overcome that? And then you can study the system well enough to be able to make strategic changes that benefit you. The people who understand this will get it. If you don't get it, forget about it. Quickest way to break out of this system: produce, consume, repeat, right? You are literally plugged into a system that's designed for your downfall. How do you come out of it? Number one is awakening. Unplug yourself from the system, because if you do not, you remain dependent on the system. So the system will produce, right? It's up to you to consume, because if you don't, then they cannot repeat. And then your mind is fresh thinking, how do I actually break out of the system? Because you cannot break out of a system with the same ideologies and the same nervous system and the same mechanism. When I talk about mechanism, I'm talking about your operational thinking and the prefrontal cortex that was created by the system, and you're trying to use it to fight against the very system. That's not going to work, right? So we need a refresh, we need a restart, we need to rejigger things. And how we do that is stop consuming. And what do I mean by stop consuming? What do you stop consuming? Bro, it's in everything you do. Social media. And I'm not saying you should not use social media. I'm saying use it with caution. Use it with, how does this benefit me? How can I make the most of this? Instead of looking at like, okay, cool, like be a consumer. How can I be a producer? Even in your food. So ultra processed food, we're going to talk about a different video on that. It literally causes inflammation within your body, within your brain, and slows down your thinking. So you're literally stuck in a position where you cannot escape. And even the very things that you're using to fuel your body is created in such a way that it stops you from doing that. It's easy for them to produce, it costs less, and then they market it, and because they know like you're very busy, you want quick, easy, fast stuff. So they've created a world where your nervous system is constantly on. Your nervous system was created to function at high alert for a short period of time. When you think about it, you go out hunting, you identify a potential threat or potential dinner, you're like, we need to tackle that thing down. Strategic involvement, whether it's you and your small tribe of people, you come up with a plan, you do the hunting, you go back home, you feed the family, boom, dusted. Short period of time, brain on high alert, now we can go back to the confine of safety and we can rest, which was society at the time. Society has become the very thing that is unsafe. So you exist within it constantly, so you're always constantly on a high alert. Every ping, every notification, every email, I've got to go to work tomorrow, this bill's due, I need to hit the gym before I lose my mind, and you're constantly on high alert. So your brain is fragmenting and you're like, I don't know what to do. And what do? They feed you food that makes it worse. And then you're stuck here feeling helpless and thinking something's gonna change, the world's going to end, but the truth is no one's coming to save you unless you save yourself. So once you understand that, then you can start taking a stand against the system. And I'm not saying go out with placards and shout, end the system, because like I said, the system exists and has a purpose, and there's a lot of laws that protect the system. If you don't believe me, just take a placard, go outside and start a mass riot. You will experience the consequences of that yourself. So the system is not inherently bad, it's just people within the system that make it bad. Because remember, the system was created to serve the people, now the people exist to serve the system. It's just gone belly up. That's just where it is. So it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility to do something about it. So if you like the content of this video, then please subscribe, because this is just the introduction, and then we'll be taking further steps into how exactly you can set goals, how exactly you can break at different stages, and what level of awareness you are at and things like that. In the meantime, stay wise and optimize.